name's Russ Feet Penniman, and I had the privilege of flying the Tomcat at a Naval Air Station Miramar and aboard Kitty Hawk and aboard the Lincoln from 1983 to about 1994. So I had 11 years straight, and ended up as the operations officer at the fighter wing at Miramar. And the story I'm going to tell is one about a normal and routine operation that didn't become so normal and routine. And so to set the stage, we're on the Kitty Hawk coming home from a 6-month deployment. We took her from San Diego through the Persian Gulf and into the Med, and we are on our way home. So we just had a good Liberty port in Caen, France, and they're getting the air wing back up to speed. And so we're doing our first night operations after pulling out of port. And that particular night, I was assigned as a super spare, and which is a little unusual because normally the fighter squadrons would man 3 airplanes to fly 2. So you'd have 2 go-birds and a spare, and you had 2 fighter squadrons. So basically you had 2 for each squadron and a spare for each squadron. And I was a super spare to fill in for anybody that didn't go flying. I've always been a big advocate of, know your airplane, know its parameters, know the mission. And that particular night as the super spare, we probably weren't paying enough attention to the brief, because the probability of everybody going down and us going flying, or losing 2 airplanes and us going flying, was pretty slim. So Merlin Olsen and I were probably not paying as much attention to the brief as we should have been paying. And anyway, we went ahead and launched. They launched the first 2 airplanes for the first fighter squadron. They launched the first 2 airplanes for the other squadron, and then they launched the spares for both squadrons. And then they came over and broke us down and launched us. So a little surprising, they launched 7 airplanes that night to make 4. And as I found out later, what was not shared with us was the Air Wing Commander's plan was to launch everybody so that we could all get night traps that night, so it would be night current. So the entire Air Wing would be night current when we pulled back into Norfolk. So anyway, we went up and we've got 7 airplanes doing basically a 4 airplane mission against a flight of A-7s that are working north of us, and we're running intercepts on them. And at one point, we had a little too many airplanes in the sky, and I saw lights coming at me, didn't know if they saw me or not. And my plan was always, if I saw an airplane coming at me and I wasn't sure if they saw us, was to go down. So for those who don't know, birds will tend to wrap up and go down, and it's uncomfortable for an aviator because you're pushing the stick away, and you're putting negative G on the airplane, and you're just going below whatever the target is coming in. So we went ahead and went underneath what had turned out to be one of the A-7s. And as I leveled the airplane out, the idiot lights start coming on. So I start getting caution warning lights, and a number of things are going on. So I asked Merlin Olsen, who's my back seater, I said, does he have anything going on in the back seat? And I looked up, and all I could see was a white light back there that lit up the back cockpit. And he goes, yeah, everything's. I've got a fire back here, and I've got a bunch of things sparking. So my immediate response was to go ahead and shut off the 2 generators, and which took us down to the emergency generator, which just had us on, basically the essentials to fly the airplane. So then we kind of assessed what we had, and kind of turned back towards the ship, and then talked to our wingman and said, basically, we've got a problem. Just stay away from us while we're trying to figure this thing out. So as we start back towards the ship, I remember specifically we had 14.7 thousand pounds of fuel left in the airplane. This kind of becomes critical later on in the story. So we're heading back home, and then Merlin and I start discussing what our possible options might be. And one option was to go into the Azores, which was the divert, and the main runway in the Azores was closed. And so it was going to be to the alternate runway. And here we were, an airplane with basically what turned out to be only DC power. We had lost all our AC equipment. And so basically we had a radio and a transponder and no nav gear and none of the computers for the airplane. So we kind of figured that probably wasn't a good idea. And the other option was to go back to the ship with an airplane that was a little unhappy. And the final option was to, just get out of the airplane. So we both kind of nixed that one. Merlin was a weightlifter, and he didn't swim really well, so Merlin's thought of spending time in the water was not at the top of his priority list. So anyway, we got a hold of the ship, told them what our problems were, and I remember Flats Flaherty, the skipper of the squadron, happened to be in Pry-Fly, so he came up, and so he goes, well, Feet, what's wrong with the airplane? And I explained it to him, and he goes, well, what's not working? And I said, well, why don't I tell you what is working, and we can kind of go from there. So fortunately, the radios did work. We had lost the cockpit lighting, we had lost all the SAS systems, we had lost the computers, but the great thing was the radios were still working, so we could talk to folks. So we started on downhill, and we got our wingman to come over and join on us. It was Josh Whip Runyon and Joe Vocal. So at that point, we've dirtied the airplane up, and we had dumped down to what I thought was the correct weight. The Tomcat dumps at 1,500 pounds a minute, so I did the math on that to dump down to bring back weight. So I had to dump about 9,000 pounds of fuel. So we did the time math on it and figured how long that would take to dump down to about 5,000 pounds. And anyway, then got the airplane dirty, and we're headed back towards the ship. And we had Josh Runyon and Joe Cord Vocal was in the other airplane join on us and give us a good look over and tell us what the configuration of the airplane was, because we had no indicator about what our flap position were, what our gear position was, whether or not the hook was down. So they joined up on us and gave us a look over, said, the gear's down, the main flaps are down, the aux flaps are up, hook's down. So the important thing was the gear was down and the hook was down. And then at that point, we let them take the lead, and I flew off Josh's wing, and he set us up for an approach, got us underneath the overcast. So now we're down about 1,200 feet, and it's just really dark, and we're flying in on his wing. And about a quarter mile, he goes ahead and breaks away, and we complete the approach coming in to land the airplane. And I'd been a landing signal officer in VF-211, so I was one of the guys that stood on the platform and helped airplanes get aboard the ship. And I figured those guys were seeing me on their instruments, and they knew I was coming, and that they would call out any issues that I had with the airplane. And as it was, anyone that tells you they haven't been scared getting the airplane aboard at night, I would say they're either lying to you or they're not really bright, because everybody's had their moments behind the ship at night. And when things start getting more interesting to me, my left hand gets a mind of its own and starts moving forward and pushing the throttles up, so to give us a little extra speed and a little extra altitude just in case. This night was no exception. And we ended up, I drove the ball almost to the top of the mirror. And then I realized that, if I didn't get the ball back down in the center, I wasn't going to get aboard the ship. So I started working the ball back down. And about the time I crossed the ramp, the ball was in the center, the airplane was where it was supposed to be. And we got the airplane aboard. And as it turned out, we weren't quite right on our weight determination. And we two-blocked the arresting gear on the ship, which means we ran it out to its full limit, which could have been a real problem if we had broken the arresting gear or broken the hook or broken both. So we're really happy to get aboard, back aboard the ship. And there's an old saying about having medicinal alcohol on ships, and there's a little bit of truth to that. And we took advantage of that opportunity that night. And I don't think the youngsters today enjoy the days that we had, back 20, 30 years ago. As it turns out, what had happened was they'd washed the airplane that day, and water had intruded into the airplane, and the drain that was supposed to drain water out of the bottom of the airplane didn't, and the water had settled underneath a number of the electrical panels. So when I did the push away to get underneath the other airplane, the water rose up and got over the electrical panels and basically shorted out a number of the AC buses, which is why we lost AC power. So of all my flights, that was probably the most memorable, and it certainly was one of the longest.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss new upcoming videos. And see all the Tomcat Tales films now streaming on YouTube TV.